Before the chandeliers in the east wing were dimmed for the evening, before the last of the dinner guests collected their coats from the marble foyer, before the snow outside began to fall in the slow, deliberate way that only late November snow falls, a young woman in a gray uniform reached up to clear a wine glass from a high shelf and let out a breath so quiet that no one else in the room would have heard it. But one man did. One man had been watching her for the better part of an hour, not the way men sometimes watch women, but the way a man watches something he is trying to understand. And when she winced, when the smallest involuntary flinch crossed her face as her sleeve slid up her forearm and revealed the dark blue shadow of a bruise that ran from her wrist to her elbow, he set down his glass of bourbon on the polished mahogany sideboard and walked toward her without saying a word. Because men in his world had built empires on knowing what people tried to hide. And what this woman was hiding had nothing to do with stolen silver or skimmed wages. What this woman was hiding was the thing he himself had spent 50 years pretending he had never seen. The Halvern estate sat at the highest point of Briarcliff Ridge, 3 stories of pale stone with tall windows that glowed amber against the dark of the surrounding pines. It was not the kind of house that announced itself. It did not need to. Anyone who lived in the surrounding towns knew whose name the deed bore, and anyone who did not would never have reason to drive that far up the ridge. Inside, on this particular Tuesday evening, the house held the soft static of a dinner that had recently ended. The dining room still smelled of duck confit and rosemary. The crystal had been collected. The kitchen staff was already 2 hours into a cleanup that would last well past midnight. And in the east drawing room, a young woman named Marin Whitlock stood on the second rung of a small wooden step stool, reaching up to retrieve a wine glass that someone had left on a shelf above the fireplace, and trying very hard not to let anyone see the way her body was beginning to fail her. Marin was 26. She had hair the color of wet wheat tied at the nape of her neck in a low, practical bun, and pale gray eyes a high school English teacher had once compared to river stones in the rain. She was small, not delicate but compact, the kind of small that came from years of skipping meals so someone else could eat. She had been working at the Halvern estate for 4 months, hired through an agency that did not ask questions and paid in clean envelopes on Fridays. The wage was nearly twice what she had ever earned. She had cried in her car the night she got the call, not because she was happy, but because she had been so close to running out of hope that the news of work felt almost cruel in its timing. She had told no one about the bruises. Bruises were the kind of thing you arranged your sleeves to cover. Marin wore a long-sleeved undershirt beneath her uniform every day, even when the house was warm. The undershirt was not a luxury, it was a wall, and on this Tuesday evening, as she reached for the glass on the high shelf, the wall slipped half an inch, and the bruise that ran from the bone of her wrist to the soft hollow of her elbow was visible to anyone who happened to be looking. Most nights, no one was looking. But on this evening, a man named Cassius Halvern had been sitting in a leather wingback chair beside the fireplace for 40 minutes, drinking a single glass of bourbon, watching the snow. And when the sleeve slipped, and her face flickered with the particular kind of pain that has been carried too long, Cassius Halvern saw it. He saw the bruise. He saw the wince. He saw the way her whole body recalibrated in the space of a single breath. And beneath all of it, he saw the small, still flicker in her eyes that he recognized so completely it made his bourbon go bitter on his tongue. He had seen that flicker before, in his own house, growing up, on the face of the woman who had raised him. He set the glass down. The sound was not loud, but in the quiet of the drawing room, it was enough to make Marin turn her head. When she saw him rising from the chair and walking toward her with a slow, unhurried stride, her face did the thing the faces of women like her always did. It went smooth. It went blank. Revealing nothing had been the only consistent strategy of her adult life. "Sir," she said, her voice steady, I was just clearing the last of the glasses. I will be out of your way in a moment. Cassius did not answer. He stopped 6 feet from the step stool, close enough to see her face clearly, far enough away that she would not feel cornered. He was 60 years old, broad through the shoulders, with iron gray hair cut close and a small white scar at the corner of his mouth. How long, he said. Sir. How long have you been wearing that undershirt under your uniform? I get cold easily. It was a good lie. She had told it 100 times to 100 different people, and most of them had accepted it because most people did not actually want to know. Cassius Halvern was not most people. Come down off that stool, Miss Whitlock, he said quietly. The glass can wait. Marin stepped down. She held the empty wine glass in front of her like a small, fragile shield. Roll up your sleeve. The words were not loud. They were not unkind. But they were the kind of words that did not leave room for refusal. Please, she whispered. The word came out before she could stop it, and as soon as it left her mouth she hated herself for it, because please was a word she had spent 4 years training herself never to say out loud to a man. Cassius heard the exact way she said it, and something behind his face, something that had been sealed shut for 50 years in a room that did not have a door, cracked open by the width of a single hair. Miss Whitlock, he said, his voice dropping half a register. I am not going to touch you. I am not going to hurt you. I am asking you to roll up your sleeve because I have already seen what is under it, and I would like to know who put it there. Marin did not roll up her sleeve. She stood very still in the middle of the drawing room, holding an empty wine glass in front of her chest, and she said nothing at all. And Cassius Halvern, who had built his name on the precise reading of silences, understood every word she did not say. Sit down, Miss Whitlock, he said, gesturing to the small upholstered chair beside the fireplace. I should finish the glasses. The glasses can wait. The head of housekeeping expects the room cleared by 10. The head of housekeeping works for me. Sit down. There was no anger in his voice. There was only the calm certainty of a man whose instructions were followed. Marin sat. She perched on the very edge of the rose-colored cushion, the empty wine glass balanced on her lap. Cassius returned to his own chair. He folded his hands and looked at her the way a doctor looks at an X-ray. Tell me your name. Your full name. Marin Whitlock. How old are you? 26. Where are you from? Iron Hollow, 3 hours north of here. The mill town. I know it. The mill closed in 2012. Yes, sir. My father worked there. Before. She did not finish the sentence. He did not press. He let the silence settle the way a man lets snow settle on a porch railing. Then he said, simply, Who hurt you, Marin? She looked at the fire. Nobody hurt me. I fell. The handrail came loose on the back stairs of my building, and I caught myself against the wall. It was a clean lie. She had carried it for 3 weeks the way other women carried lipstick. That bruise is older than a week, Cassius said, and the way you flinched when you reached for the glass tells me there is at least 1 cracked rib under that uniform, possibly 2. The bruise on your forearm is consistent with a defensive injury. You raised your arm to protect your face. The angle is wrong for a fall. Something cold moved through her chest, the sensation of being seen. Truly seen. Sir, she said, please do not fire me. The words came out before she could stop them. The words of a woman who had been trained to assume that any attention from any man in any position of power would end with the loss of the only thing she could not afford to lose. The small white scar at the corner of his mouth pulled. I am not going to fire you, Marin. You do not have to. The agency can. And I cannot lose this job. Sir, I cannot lose this job. Why? Because... She looked at the empty wine glass in her lap. She turned it slowly between her fingers, and she said the words she had not said out loud to anyone in this house. since the day she was hired. Because I have a brother. Somewhere in the back of the house, a clock began to chime 10. His name is Theo. He is 8. He has a heart condition. He was born with it. He has had 2 surgeries already, and he needs a third one within the next year. The medication he takes every morning costs $1,100 a month, even with the assistance program, and I am the only person in the world who pays for any of it. Our mother died when he was 3. Our father is not someone who pays for things. So I pay. I have been paying since I was 19, and this job pays more than any job I have ever had. So please, whatever you saw on my arm, please do not fire me. Cassius did not speak for a long time. When he finally did, his voice was lower. Where is Theo right now? At home. With our neighbor. She watches him in the evenings when I work the late shift. And the person who put that bruise on your arm, is that person at the apartment? Marin did not answer. The silence pressed against the walls. The silence of a question that had been asked in a way that was not really a question, because the man asking it already knew the answer. He is my father, she whispered. Cassius closed his eyes. His whole face went still, the way a lake goes still in the moments before a storm breaks its surface, and Marin, who had spent 4 years learning to read the faces of dangerous men, recognized that whatever was happening behind that stillness was not anger directed at her. It was something else. It belonged to him. Cassius had not let himself fully think about his mother in 11 years. He thought about her now. He thought about her standing at the kitchen sink of the small house on Bellwether Lane in the spring of 1974, washing the same plate over and over while a radio played a song he could no longer remember. He thought about the way the long sleeve of her house dress had ridden up while she scrubbed, and the way his 8-year-old self had seen the bruise on her wrist before she had pulled the sleeve back down with the same practice speed he had just watched Marin use 40 minutes earlier in this very room. He thought about how she had turned and seen him watching, and how her face had gone smooth and blank, and how she had said, in a voice that was steady the way other people's voices were musical, "Cass, sweetheart, go and finish your homework. Mama is just tired tonight." He had finished his homework. He had pulled the pillow over his head when the sounds came through the wall, and he had counted backward from 100, and he had told himself that when he was older, when he was bigger, he would do something. He had told himself that for 40 more years. Until 11 years ago, when his mother, then 68, had finally come to live with him at Briarcliff Ridge after his father's death from a stroke. She had spent her last 9 months in the quiet rooms of his house, and she had died in her sleep on a Tuesday morning in October, without the world ever knowing what she had endured. 9 months. He had only had 9 months with her in safety. He had spent 40 years trying to convince her to leave Bellwether Lane, and she had refused him every time. By the time his father's stroke had given her permission to come, her body had already been carrying too much for too long. The doctors had called it heart failure. They had not used the word that Cassius had carried with him, in silence, ever since. He had built, over the decades, an organization that did not tolerate certain kinds of men. The men who worked for him had stopped asking why somewhere around year 7, because they had figured out that asking would not produce an answer. But sitting across from Marin now, watching her hold an empty wine glass in her trembling hands and apologize for being injured, he understood that the wall he had built around the memory of his mother had a door in it after all. And the door had just been opened. "Marin," he said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." She nodded. "You are not going to lose this job. You are not going back to that apartment tonight. Your brother is not going to spend another night under that roof. Whatever has been happening in that apartment is going to stop tonight, and you do not need to know yet exactly how. You only need to agree to let it happen." "Sir," she whispered, "I do not know you. I clean your house. You have never spoken to me before tonight. Why are you doing this?" He looked at the fire. He looked back at her. Because 52 years ago I was 8 years old, and I watched my mother pull her sleeve down the same way you just did. And nobody asked her any questions. And nobody offered her anything, and she spent her life paying the cost of that silence. I am paying attention now. To you. And I am not going to look away. The room held very still. The fire popped softly. And Marin Whitlock, who had not cried in front of another human being since she was 19 years old, felt the first hot tear slide down the side of her nose and land on the cuff of her uniform. Cassius stood up and walked to the small writing desk in the corner. He picked up the rotary phone and dialed a number from memory. Sullivan, I need you at the house. Bring Dr. Marlowe. Bring the car. Bring 2 of the men. We are going to an apartment on Selwick Street tonight. There is an 8-year-old boy there named Theo Whitlock. He has a heart condition. He needs to be moved carefully and he needs to be moved quickly. There is also a man at that address. He is the boy's father. I want him removed from the situation. I do not want him hurt. I want him taken from the apartment to somewhere quiet. And I want him kept there until I have time to speak with him personally tomorrow morning. He set the phone down. Marin, he said, get your coat. We are going to your brother. The car that pulled up in front of the apartment building on Selwick Street at 11:17 on Tuesday night was a black sedan with tinted windows and plates that did not match any registry the local police would have been able to pull. The snow had thickened, and the residents of Selwick Street had long ago learned the survival principle that in a neighborhood like theirs, the safest response to an unfamiliar car was to pretend you had never seen it. Marin sat in the back with her hands folded in her lap. Beside her sat a doctor named Felix Marlowe, a thin man in his 50s with silver hair and the calm bedside presence of a man who had not always worked for the kind of people who paid in cash. Cassius sat in the front passenger seat. Sullivan drove. There was another car behind them, with 2 men inside whose names Marin would never learn. Miss Whitlock, Dr. Marlowe said gently. Tell me about Theo's medication schedule. 8:30. He should have already taken his evening dose. The neighbor has the bottle. Good. Is your father expecting you home? He thinks I am working until midnight. He will be in the bedroom watching television. Theo will be asleep at the neighbor's. She lives across the hall. Cassius turned slightly in the front seat. Are there any weapons in the apartment, Marin? She closed her eyes. There may be a few. He keeps things in the bedroom and in the front closet. I do not believe he has a firearm anymore. Marin did not pull away. She stared at the 3rd-floor window where the blue television light was still flickering, and she counted backward from 100. She got to 73. The blue television light went out. She did not understand at first what it meant. Then she did. She pressed her free hand against her mouth, and she did not make a sound, and she kept counting, and she did not stop until Sullivan opened the back door and said, in a voice that was very gentle for a man of his size, Miss Whitlock, your brother is asking for you. The door across the hall was open. The neighbor stood in the doorway in a pale pink robe, her gray hair in curlers, her eyes red with a fear she was trying very hard to hide for the sake of the small boy beside her in dinosaur pajamas, holding her free hand. Theo Whitlock was small for his age. He had the same pale gray eyes as his sister, a mop of brown hair, and a small surgical scar at the base of his throat. He was holding a stuffed rabbit, faded gray, missing one eye. When he saw Marin coming up the last few steps, his face did something that almost broke her in half. It opened. It became young. Mare, he whispered. She crossed the landing in 3 steps and dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms so carefully, because she knew exactly which of his ribs were thinner than they should have been. He pressed his face into her shoulder. His small hand fisted in the back of her coat, and he did not let go. I am here, Marin whispered. I am here. I am here. The neighbor pressed a tissue against her mouth. Sweetheart. Whatever this is. He has been a good boy. He took his medicine on time. He brushed his teeth. Thank you, Marin said. Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Marlowe knelt beside them. Hi, my name is Felix. I am a doctor, and I am a friend of your sister's. Is it all right if I listen to your heart for just a minute? Theo looked at Marin. Marin nodded. He held very still while the cold disc pressed against his pajama shirt. After a long moment, Dr. Marlowe nodded once at Marin. Good and strong. Where we are going? Theo asked. Sullivan crouched down beside them. We are taking you somewhere warm tonight, buddy. There is a big house up on a hill, and it has a fire in the fireplace, and a kitchen that is always making something good to eat, and a bed that is bigger than any bed you have ever seen. Can the rabbit come? The rabbit absolutely comes. The rabbit is the most important passenger. Theo looked at Marin one more time, and Marin found just enough strength to smile at him. Okay, he said. Let us go. The neighbor pressed a small plastic shopping bag into Marin's hand as they were leaving. A toothbrush, a folded pair of clean pajamas, the orange prescription bottle. She kissed Marin on the side of the face, and then she kissed the top of Theo's head, and then she stepped back into her apartment and closed the door. The four of them walked back down the staircase. Marin did not look at her own door as she passed it. Whatever had happened behind it had happened. Cassius was waiting beside the sedan in his long black overcoat. Hello, Theo. My name is Cassius. I am going to ride with the other car. I will see you at the house. Theo blinked up at him. Are you my sister's friend too? Cassius looked at Marin. Marin looked at him. Yes, Cassius said. I am your sister's friend. He closed the door. The car began to move. And as the building disappeared behind them in the falling snow, Marin leaned her head against the cold glass of the window, and she pulled her brother into her side, and for the first time in 8 months, she breathed all the way down to the bottom of her lungs. The Halvern estate at 1 in the morning was a different house than it had been at 8 in the evening. The chandeliers had been dimmed. The only lights still burning came from the kitchen, where the head of housekeeping, Iola Brennan, was waiting beside a stove on which she had set a small pot of milk to warm. Iola had been called shortly before midnight. She had been told 3 things. A child was coming. The child had a heart condition. The sister was coming with him, and the sister was not to be spoken to about her injuries unless she chose to speak first. Iola had not asked any questions. She had pulled a small set of pajamas, blue with white stars, from a bin in the linen closet. She had warmed clean sheets on the radiator. She had laid out a butter cookie on a saucer beside a glass of water on the bedside table. Because butter cookies had been the thing her own children had always asked for after a long night. The kitchen smelled of warm milk and vanilla when the headlights swept across the windows. Iola walked through the hallway and opened the heavy oak door before the bell could be rung. Come in out of the cold, sweetheart. She said it to the boy, but she meant it for both of them. Theo stepped into the foyer and looked up, and up, and up. He had never been in a house like this. He held the rabbit against his chest and looked at all of it with the wide, unguarded eyes of a child who had not yet learned to be embarrassed by his own wonder. Mare, he whispered, is this a hotel? No, sweetheart. Is it a hospital? No. Is it a castle? Marin laughed. It came out of her like a small, surprised cough, the sound of a laugh that had not been used in a very long time. It is a house, Theo. It belongs to my friend. We are going to stay here for a little while. Iola lowered herself onto one knee and met Theo at his eye level. My name is Iola, sweetheart. I look after this house. I have a glass of warm milk waiting for you in the kitchen, and a butter cookie, and a pair of blue pajamas with white stars on them that I think will fit you just about right. Are you hungry? Are you cold? Are you sleepy? Tell me what you need first. Theo considered the question with his usual seriousness. I am all 3. Then we will do all 3. In that order. She held out her hand. Theo looked at Marin. Marin nodded. He took Iola's hand, and the two of them walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen. Marin stood alone in the foyer. The front door closed behind her. Cassius had stayed back at the apartment to handle, she understood, things she did not need to know about. Somewhere in the house, a clock chimed 1:15. She did not move. She did not know how to move. She had been moving in one form or another for 2 years, moving through shifts at 3 different jobs, moving carefully around her father's moods, moving without rest, without permission. And now, suddenly, the moving had stopped. And her body did not know what to do with the stopping. Her knees gave way. She sat down on the cold marble floor with her back against the inside of the closed front door, and she pulled her knees up to her chest, and the sound that came out of her was not a sob. It was something older. It was the sound a body made when it had finally been given permission to stop holding itself together. She did not hear Iola come back. She only felt the soft, warm weight of a folded blanket being draped across her shoulders. She only felt the soft press of an old woman's hand against the back of her head. And Iola Brennan, who had raised 4 children and buried one of them, said nothing at all. She only sat on the cold marble floor at 1:20 in the morning, and she held a young woman she had known for less than 10 minutes, and she did not tell her it was going to be all right. Because women like Iola knew that telling a person it was going to be all right was something you said when you were not paying attention. Iola was paying attention. She just held on. Cassius returned to the estate at 3:47 in the morning. He climbed the wide staircase to the second floor and stopped in front of the door of the small guest room. He did not enter. He simply stood in the hallway, his hand resting on the doorframe, and listened. Through the door he could hear the soft, even breathing of 2 sleeping people. The slightly faster rhythm of a child's breath and the slower, deeper rhythm of a young woman's. He stood there for a long time, long enough that the muscles in his shoulders, which had been clenched since he had walked into the apartment on Selwick Street 4 hours earlier, finally began to loosen. Long enough that a single tear, which he had not authorized, slid down the side of his nose and disappeared into the line of his beard. He had spent 50 years preparing for tonight without knowing it. He had built an organization that did not tolerate certain kinds of men, and he had told himself for 50 years that he was building it for his mother. That had been true, but it had also, he understood now, been an apology. An apology for the 4 decades during which she had asked him for nothing because she had forgotten how to ask, and he had given her nothing because he had been waiting to be asked. He had been a coward, in the polite, formal way that grown sons were sometimes cowards. And tonight, 52 years after the spring evening when he had watched her pull her sleeve down at the kitchen sink, a young woman had reached for a wine glass on a high shelf, and her sleeve had slipped half an inch. And Cassius Halvern had finally understood that there was a different choice available to him this time. The choice to not wait. The choice to insist. He turned and walked the rest of the way down the hallway to his own bedroom. The house settled into the deep quiet of 3 in the morning. Outside the tall windows, the snow continued to fall. Marin woke at 6:43 to a kind of light she did not recognize. It was sunlight. Real sunlight. Pale winter sunlight falling in long, pale rectangles across a quilt she had never seen before, across the small, still face of her brother sleeping beside her, in a bed that was queen-sized and slightly too tall for an 8-year-old to climb into without help. She did not move for a long time. She lay very still on her side and watched him breathe. His mouth was slightly open. The one-eyed rabbit was tucked under his chin. The night was over. That was the thing her body kept returning to, the way her tongue kept returning to a missing tooth. The night was over, and the next night would be over. And whatever happened next, the particular night that had been her life for the last 8 months, was over. She slid out of bed very carefully, Someone had changed her clothes. Iola, probably. She found her uniform folded on a chair with a small folded note resting on top. Sweetheart, your clothes have been laundered. There is a robe on the back of the bathroom door if you would like a hot shower before breakfast. Take all the time you need. We are not in any hurry today. Iola. In the bathroom, she stood in front of the vanity and looked at herself in the mirror. The face that looked back at her was a face she did not entirely recognize. The bruise on her cheek that she had been covering with foundation for 6 days was visible in the morning light. Her lower lip had a small cut at the corner. She looked at all of it. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She had spent 8 months looking at this face only in glimpses. She had not, in 8 months, simply looked at her own face the way another person might have looked at it. With curiosity, with sorrow, with something close to compassion. She looked now. And what she saw, beneath the bruises and the tired, was a young woman of 26 who had 2 pale gray eyes and a small scar above her left eyebrow from a fall off a bicycle when she was 9. She saw a person who existed, a person who had been, somewhere underneath all of the surviving, a person all along. When she came back into the bedroom, Theo was sitting up in the bed. Mare, there is a tray, by the door, with food. 2 glasses of orange juice, 2 small bowls of cut fruit, 2 plates of buttered toast, a small bowl of warm oatmeal with brown sugar, and a single white envelope with her name on it. Take the morning, the note said. Eat. Rest. There is no work today. Mr. Halvern is in the library when you are ready to speak with him, but you are not required to. Dr. Marlowe will be by at 10. There is a woman named Margaret who will be calling at 11. Iola. Marin picked up Theo and carried him to the small table by the window. She watched him eat his first warm breakfast in a house with sunlight and quiet, and she did not, for the first time in 2 years, count the cost of any of it. Margaret Vellanora called at 11 o'clock exactly. Miss Whitlock. My name is Margaret Vellanora. I am an attorney. I have been retained on your behalf and your brother's behalf as of approximately 4 o'clock this morning. Before I begin, I want you to know that nothing I am about to tell you requires anything from you today. You do not need to make any decisions. Today is a day for you to listen. Yes. As of 7:30 this morning, an emergency petition for guardianship was filed in the family court of this county, asking the court to recognize you as the sole legal guardian of your brother. The petition is supported by medical documentation from the Children's Clinic, by a sworn statement from Mrs. Coraline Aldine of your apartment building, by photographs taken at 6 this morning of injuries on your person, and by a statement from Dr. Marlowe regarding the medical neglect of your brother's heart condition. The petition also includes a request for an emergency restraining order. Both petitions are under expedited review. A judge will rule no later than 4 this afternoon. I expect both rulings to be granted. Marin had set the teacup down at some point. Her hand had begun to shake. The second matter is your father. He is currently sitting in a private interview room at a facility approximately 20 minutes from where you are now. He is not in police custody. He has not been physically harmed. What happens then? He will be presented with 2 paths. The first involves him voluntarily signing away every parental right he has ever held over you and your brother, agreeing to a permanent restraining order, and agreeing to leave this state by the end of the week. If he chooses this path, he will not be charged criminally. The second path involves criminal complaints, aggravated assault, child endangerment, and medical neglect of a minor with a known cardiac condition. The second path will result in a prison sentence of between 7 and 12 years. He will be told both paths. He will be given 30 minutes to choose. I have done this work for 31 years. Men like your father almost always choose the first path. Marin did not answer for a long time. She looked out the window at the snow on the grounds. A small dark bird sat on the bare branch of an oak tree. It tilted its head once and flew away. She thought about Theo. She thought about whether he would have to testify. She thought about her mother, who had loved her father in the brittle, damaged way that women in those circumstances learn to love. Her mother would have wanted, more than anything, for him to simply vanish from their lives, to be elsewhere. The first path, Marin said. You can change your mind. At any point in the next 30 days, the second path is still available. I understand. The third matter concerns your brother's medical care. I have spoken with Dr. Pemberton this morning. The third surgery, when scheduled, will be performed by Dr. Edmund Halloway at the Cardiac Institute in the city. Dr. Halloway is the most experienced pediatric cardiac surgeon on the Eastern Seaboard. The surgery, the hospital stay, the post-operative care, the medication for the next 10 years, and any related expenses will be paid in full from a private fund that has been established this morning in your brother's name. The fund is not a loan. The fund is not contingent on anything. Marin pressed the back of her hand against her mouth. After a long moment, she managed a single word. Why? That is a question, Miss Whitlock, that you will need to ask Mr. Halvern. I can only tell you what is being done. I have one more matter, and then I will let you go. Your contract through the agency is still in effect. You are not required to continue working in any capacity, and you will continue to receive your full wages regardless. If you wish to do something else entirely, including pursuing further education, that option is available too. I would encourage you not to make this decision today. You are not alone in this anymore, Marin. I want you to hear me say that. You are not alone. The line went quiet. Marin did not hang up immediately. She held the handset against her ear and listened to the soft static of the open line for another full minute. Marin did not see Cassius for the rest of that day. She understood, without being told, that this was deliberate. She spent the afternoon with Theo. Iola found them clean clothes that fit. A pair of jeans for Marin. A dark blue sweater that was soft enough to make her cry quietly into the sleeve when she pulled it over her head. For Theo, jeans and a flannel shirt, and a pair of small boots, and a winter coat that fit him as if it had been waiting for him. In the afternoon, the two of them walked the grounds. The snow had stopped. The sun had come out. The pines along the edge of the property held white drifts in their long branches. Theo walked through the snow with the careful wonder of an explorer in a foreign country. He picked up a handful and let it fall through his fingers. He laughed. He laughed. It was a small laugh, and it lasted only a second. But Marin heard it, and she stood very still in the snow with her hands in the pockets of her borrowed coat. And she watched her brother laugh, and she understood that this single small laugh in the snow on a Wednesday afternoon was a thing she would carry with her for the rest of her life. Dr. Marlowe had come at 10, 2 cracked ribs on the lower right side. He had wrapped them with a binder and given her pain medication. He had not asked how the injuries had occurred. By evening, Margaret had called back with the rulings. Both petitions had been granted. Roy Whitlock had, as predicted, chosen the first path. He would be on a bus out of state by Friday morning. The agreement included a provision that he would be required to remain at least 300 miles from his children for the rest of his natural life. Marin had walked into the small guest room where Theo was building a fort out of the spare quilts on the bed. Theo, honey, we are not going to live with our father anymore. Not ever again. We are going to live somewhere else. I do not know yet exactly where, but it will be somewhere safe. Theo had peeked out from inside the fort. Okay, do you have any questions about that? Will I still get my surgery? Yes. The very best doctor. And after the surgery, will my heart be fixed? The doctor thinks so. And then I can run. And then you can run. As fast as you want. Wherever you want. From inside the fort, his small voice said, very faintly, okay. That is good. That is really good, Mare. 3 weeks passed. The household at Briarcliff Ridge began the slow, strange process of absorbing two new people into its routines. Theo started light schooling with a tutor named Mrs. Beecham, a retired schoolteacher with white hair and a steady voice. He had been behind in his reading because his father had not believed in books. He caught up within 10 days. Mrs. Beecham told Marin, after the second week, that Theo was one of the brightest 8-year-olds she had taught in 40 years. Marin herself began gently to come back into her own body. Her ribs healed. The bruises faded. She slept 7 and 8 and 9 hours a night, and her body, which had run on 4 hours a night for years, accepted the new amount with the gratitude of an animal that had been kept too long in a small cage. She did, eventually, see Cassius again. It happened on the morning of the 10th day. She had walked past the open door of the library and seen him sitting in one of the leather chairs by the fire, reading a book. He had looked up. She had stopped. "Good morning, Marin." "Good morning, Mr. Halvern." "Cassius, please." "Cassius." He had gestured to the chair across from him. She had sat. He had not said anything for a long time. Then he had said, "Finally, I owe you an apology." "I do not think you do." "I do. The apology is for the 4 months you worked in this house before I noticed your sleeve. The apology is for the fact that you cleaned my drawing room many times before I bothered to look at the woman who was cleaning it. I am sorry, Marin, for the looking away, for the lateness." "Thank you," she had said, "for seeing me when you did. It was very late. It was in time." He had nodded once. They had sat in silence for a few more minutes. Then she had stood up, and the conversation had ended. But it had not ended. It had been the beginning of something quieter, built out of small, consistent kindnesses. He left books in the library that he thought she might enjoy, never mentioning it. She returned them when she was finished, never mentioning that either. He arranged for Theo to have a fishing lesson with Sullivan one Saturday afternoon at the small pond on the edge of the property, an event that produced no fish and a great deal of wet boy. She, in turn, taped one of Theo's drawings to the door of his study without comment. The surgery took 6 hours and 17 minutes. Dr. Holloway emerged from the operating theater at 3:24 in the afternoon, with his surgical mask hanging around his neck. "Miss Whitlock, your brother's surgery was a complete success. The defect has been fully corrected. He will be groggy for a few hours, and he will need to remain in the cardiac ICU for 2 days for observation. But barring any unexpected complications, your brother is going to live a long, full, ordinary life." Marin did not cry in the waiting room. She would cry later that night, alone in the small hospital room they had given her to sleep in next to Theo's room. She would cry into a pillow that smelled of industrial detergent, and she would not stop for nearly an hour. The cry would not be a cry of grief or relief or any single nameable emotion. It would be an overdue acknowledgement that her brother was going to grow up, that she was going to know what kind of man he became. But that was later. In the waiting room, Marin simply nodded at Dr. Holloway. She thanked him. She turned, and she sat down in one of the hard plastic chairs, and she put her face in her hands for 30 seconds, and then she stood up again, because she needed to find Cassius. He had driven her to the hospital that morning. Around 11 o'clock he had quietly excused himself, telling her he had something brief to attend to. He had not returned. She found him in the hospital chapel, a small room on the ground floor, with stained glass windows and 4 wooden pews, and a single brass cross on the wall. He was sitting in the back pew, his hands folded, his head bowed. Marin walked the length of the chapel and sat down in the pew beside him. She did not speak. He did not speak. They sat there together for several minutes. After a long while, Cassius said, "Is he?" "He is fine. The surgery worked. He is going to live a long, ordinary life." Cassius closed his eyes. A single tear slid out from under his closed eyelid and disappeared into the line of his beard. "My mother had a brother," he said quietly. "I do not think I ever told you that. His name was Galen. He died of a heart condition when he was 9 years old. There was no surgery for it then. My mother used to say he had taught her how to whistle, and that she had been the one in the next bed when he died. She had been 7 years old. She had been the one in the next bed." Marin put her hand very gently on top of his hand on the pew between them. He turned his hand over and held hers. "I have spent my whole life trying to figure out why I do the things I do. I told myself it was because of my mother, and that was true. But part of it was also Galen, the brother my mother lost when she was 7. A small boy in a bed who did not get to grow up, and a small girl in the next bed who had to live with that for the rest of her life." He turned and looked at her. "Your brother is going to grow up, Marin. Yes. You are not going to be the small girl in the next bed. No, that is enough. For me, that is enough." She squeezed his hand. He squeezed hers back. They sat in the chapel for another 20 minutes. Then they got up, and they walked back to the cardiac unit, and they sat beside Theo's bed until he woke up, groggy and small and perfect, asking for his rabbit and a glass of water and his sister, all of which were already there. 6 months later, on the first warm Saturday of June, 3 people stood at the edge of the small pond on the eastern boundary of the Halvern estate. The boy was the tallest of the 3. He had grown almost 2 inches since the surgery. He was 9 years old now, and he held a fishing rod that had been bought for him in April for his birthday, and he was casting it with the focused concentration of a person who had decided that he would, eventually, by sheer persistence, become a fisherman. The young woman beside him wore a pale yellow sundress. She was sitting on a flat, warm rock beside the pond with a sketchbook open on her knees. She had started taking art classes in March. She had already filled 3 sketchbooks. The drawing on her knee was of her brother in profile, the fishing rod cocked at the angle of a question being asked. The older man stood a little distance back. He wore a dark blue work shirt and a pair of jeans. He held a thermos of coffee in one hand and a small paper bag of sandwiches in the other. There was a small private smile on his face that did not, when he was not paying attention to himself, ever quite go away anymore. It was 11:17 on this particular Saturday morning when the line on the boy's fishing rod went taut. He shouted. The young woman dropped her sketchbook. The older man set down his coffee. For the next 45 seconds, the 3 of them participated in the small chaotic ceremony of a child catching his first fish, which involved a great deal of unnecessary advice from both adults, a great deal of focused effort from the boy, and finally, with the older man's quiet hand steadying the rod from behind, a small bright bluegill flopping onto the grass at the edge of the pond. "I caught it," the boy whispered. "You did," the older man said. "I caught a fish." "You caught a fish." The young woman knelt down beside her brother. "Theo. Look at you. You are a fisherman." Theo looked up at her. His face was so full of pride that Marin felt a small involuntary tear gather at the corner of her eye. "Mare. Can we let it go?" "Of course we can. I just wanted to know I could catch one." The older man bent down. He showed Theo how to wet his hands before touching a fish, how to slide the hook free, how to lower the small body back into the water with care. The fish lay still in Theo's wet hands for one suspended second. Then it remembered itself, and it flicked its tail, and it disappeared into the dark green of the pond. Theo stood up with water dripping from his palms and he laughed. It was a different laugh than the one from his first afternoon in the snow 6 months ago. It was longer. It was louder. It was the laugh of a boy whose heart had been fixed, and whose sister had been kept, and whose life, against every reasonable expectation, had become large. When they finally walked back up the long sloping lawn toward the house, Theo ran ahead, his fishing rod held over one shoulder like a soldier with a flag, his small body moving easily through the grass. The way a body moved when running was something it could do for fun, rather than for fear. Marin and Cassius walked behind him at a slower pace. Halfway up the lawn, Marin stopped. She turned to face him. "I want to tell you something," she said. "I have been thinking for 6 months about how to say this. I do not believe in fate. I do not believe in destiny. I believe that things happen, and we make of them what we can. But I believe also that on the night I reached up for that wine glass on the high shelf and my sleeve slipped, what happened in that moment was not fate. It was a choice. Your choice. To look, and to keep looking, and to not look away. And whatever I make of any of this, I want you to know that I know. I know what you did. I know what you chose. I know what it cost you to remember the things you had to remember in order to do it. And I will not forget any of it, for as long as I live." Cassius did not answer right away. He looked at her in the warm June sunlight, and his face, for a moment, was the face of a man who had been waiting 52 years to be told something specific, and was being told it now. He nodded once. "Thank you, Marin. Thank you, Cassius." They walked the rest of the way to the house together. Theo had reached the back porch ahead of them. Iola was waiting for him at the door with a clean towel for his wet hands. Sullivan was sitting on the porch steps with a newspaper. The dog, a small old retriever named Bridie, that had been adopted from a shelter in March, because Theo had asked for a dog and Cassius had said yes, before Marin had finished forming the question, lay on the warm flagstones, thumping her tail at the sight of the boy. Marin paused at the door. She looked back, one more time, across the long green sweep of the lawn, down toward the pond where her brother had caught his first fish. It was not fear anymore. It was a place. A real place. With a pond and a porch, and a kitchen full of fresh bread. With a boy who could run, and a sister who could draw, and an old retriever named Bridie, and a man who had once been 8 years old behind a couch, and had grown up to make sure that nobody else had to be 8 years old behind a couch, if he could possibly help it. It was not a castle. It was something better. It was home. And inside, on the polished wood of a study door at the end of the second-floor hallway, a child's drawing in purple and blue crayon was still taped to the dark wood, slightly faded by 6 months of sunlight, showing 5 stick figures and a small dog standing in front of a tall, pale house under a careful yellow sun. Above them, in the careful, uncertain handwriting of a child who was just learning to write the larger words, a single word had been printed. Together. The drawing did not need to say anything else. It already said everything.